Welcome to the HoI4 War College Hearts of Iron 4 video on production and logistics. This is one of the biggest core mechanics of Hearts of Iron 4 that's hard to get your head around, so we'll go a little bit slower on this one. So basically, the core resource in Hearts of Iron 4 is factories. As you can see, Germany starts with 40 military factories, 10 naval dockyards, and 32 civilian factories. The primary tabs we're going to be concerned with in this video are the construction tab, the production tab, and the recruit and deploy tab. These three together are basically how you build armies and feed from one to the next. Now in the construction tab, you can see that I'm using 16 out of my 32 civilian factories. 15 of those are being used to produce consumer goods, which are just things my citizens need on an everyday basis. I can reduce the number of factories that are devoted to civilian goods by passing tighter laws, but we'll go over that in another video. You can also see that I'm using one of my civilian factories in a trade deal with Sweden to get tungsten, but we'll go over that in the video on trade. Civilian factories are used to build basically anything that doesn't involve directly supplying your army with equipment. It can be used to improve your infrastructure, which gives you more supply in territories where it's built and increases your troop movement speed, building air bases, anti-aircraft emplacements, radar stations, synthetic refineries, which produce oil and rubber, rocket sites and nuclear reactors once the proper technology has been unlocked, naval bases, land forts, coastal forts, and of course, more factories, both civilian and military. In my opinion, it's good to get a higher saturation of civilian factories early. Since they're used to build everything else, including military factories, having a lot of civilian factories early on will let you crank out military factories faster when you need them. The eternal question is, how many civilian factories do you need versus military factories, and how quickly do you need them? Each province has a limited number of factory slots, so you can't just spam civilian and military factories. You need to figure out a balance between the two. This will change based on what nation you're playing, but personally, I like to keep at least 15 out of 15 factories producing other civilian factories at all times, which allows you to build them one at a time at full speed. On top of this, I also like to be producing 15 out of 15 military factories at all times. As you can see, I can't do that yet. So my military factory production speed is pretty slow, but as more of these civilian factories get built, the extra factories will be allocated to this line producing military factories. Once you have 15 out of 15 production on both civilian and military factories, you can start focusing on building other things you need, like forts, infrastructure, and maybe some extra air bases and AA guns. In the late game, or if you're just pushed into a corner, you might find that it's worthwhile to convert some of your civilian factories into military factories, which costs a lot less production than just building a new factory, and it's a good way to reallocate your slots if you've already saturated all of your controlled territory with factories. Now the production tab is where your military factories turn factory output into stuff. Each of these is a production line with a number of factories allocated to it that produces things like guns and grenades, med packs, headphones, artillery, whatever this truck thing is, aircraft, and in the case of naval dockyards, boats and submarines. In addition to allocating factories, as you can see I can add 5 more to this because I do have several free. You'll also need a certain amount of specific resources for the production line to run at full efficiency. Now, as Germany, we currently have 287 steel to spare, but we're low on rubber and oil, which means we'll either have to build synthetic refineries or trade for them. But more about that in the video on trade. Each of these lines also has a production efficiency. The cap on production efficiency is currently only 50%, but it can be improved by researching better machine tools. Check out the technology video for more on that. Right now, all of our lines are running at full efficiency, as you can see by the fact that they're green. But say if I took my tactical bomber factories and decided I wanted them to start making strategic bombers instead. The efficiency goes down to 10% because the factories need to be retooled to create the new equipment. This is always something to consider. For example, when I get Panzer IIIs, I could just start building them right away, but I might want to leave one factory producing Panzer IIs and then create a new production line for the new tanks only using one factory and transition over once my production efficiency has built back up. Technology can affect this tremendously. Mostly in the industrial tree, you'll find techs that increase your production efficiency cap, your overall factory output, your factory bomb vulnerability, your production efficiency retention when you switch factories over to producing something new, and how quickly your efficiency grows when you create or switch over to a new line of stuff. Next we gotta go to the Recruit and Deploy tab. Currently I'm not recruiting any troops, so let's go ahead and train a line of infantry. I'll have to set where they're going to come out, so why not good old Brandenburg? Now when you're creating a new division, you need to wait for the supplies to fill up and a certain amount of time for the troops to be trained. If you have a lot of supplies, this might fill up immediately, but you'll still need to wait for the training time unless you want to deploy the troops early, which you can do as soon as they're 20% trained, but they'll be greenhorns and much less effective on the battlefield. This tooltip right here tells you what this division is still waiting on before it can be deployed on the battlefield. We have plenty of manpower, but we're still waiting for our factories to produce enough infantry and support equipment as well as artillery. Since we have some military factories free, we can go ahead and add some extra ones onto those two production lines, which will allow this division to be built faster. How much and what kind of equipment a division requires depends on its division template, but we'll go over that in its own video. Finally, we should take a look at the Logistics tab. This is basically the place to go to figure out how much you're making of all of your different guns and bombs and artillery and stuff, how much you need, and where you could optimize your production lines a little better. The wrench tells you how much you're producing per day. The hand tells you how much you need to meet the current demand. Balance tells you how much of this thing you're making versus how much of it you're using per day. The stored column tells you how much you have in reserve, or in this case, how much equipment you're missing before all of your divisions are fully resupplied, or supplied in the case of new divisions. Looking at this screen is the best way to figure out if you need to reallocate your military factories or start a new line of something to supply your divisions. But keep an eye on your production efficiency too. If the logistics screen says that you're at a deficit for light tanks, but you just switched over to a new model, wait for the production efficiency to max out again and see if that solves the problem without having to fiddle with stuff. Also keep in mind that running at a deficit for resources will reduce the speed of your production lines, even if you're already maxed out on production efficiency. So it's worthwhile to check out our video on trade to figure out how to get the resources that you're missing. In the case of rubber and oil, you can also get them by building synthetic refineries, but they take a hell of a long time to put up and take up a factory slot, so it may or may not be worth it if you can get oil and rubber from other sources. If you got all that down, you're well on your way to understanding Hearts of Iron 4 and conquering the world. Now you can move on to one of our other videos, such as national focuses, politics and government, or technology.